What an awesome service we've had so far. Noah, you are such an awesome little guy, and it's so great to have you as part of our church. So, I want to. We are today beginning a new series called Unseen, and as I think Reese mentioned earlier, this is going to go for the next 2 months here at Burwood Church. And before I sort of explain what the series is about, I want to share with you a little highlight from my last couple of weeks. And at the beginning, we're sharing the little pictures and things that we've been doing. And so, a highlight for me for the last couple of weeks has been finally being able to go surfing. And I see Dan's likes that. And so my whole life I've lived close to the beach until moving to Melbourne. And basically since being here, I think this is the second time I've been surfing. And so I got a message from a friend who lives around the corner 2 Sundays ago saying, and this was already in the afternoon, saying, hey, do you want to go for a surf this afternoon? Which seemed completely spontaneous, but I was in a spontaneous mood, so I said, let's do it. And so we drove the very long drive down to Phillip Island, hopped in that extremely freezing cold water, and we went surfing. And now, this is not a picture of me, but just putting up here so you can get yourself in the, imagining you're out in the surf. And one of the things that I find really always surprises me about surfing is how much of it is completely out of your control. There are some things that come down to your skill as a person surfing and that kind of thing, but so much of it is just what the ocean brings you. And there are times when you go surfing where everything just goes completely calm. And you might be out there for half an hour or more and it's as if the waves have completely vanished. Then there are those times when you find yourself in the right place at the right time and you find yourself on top of that wave and it's exhilarating and you're soaring along and it's just the best feeling in the world. And then there are times when instead of being on top of the wave is on top of you. And I'm sure all of you have had situations in the ocean where you have just had the full weight of the ocean just tumbling, crashing into you, beating you up, and you just are waiting for that opportunity to get back to the surface. But worst of all are those situations where you don't get hit just by one of those waves, but you can get hit by a whole set of those waves. And these waves will just hit you one after the other, and you get back to the surface, and you just see the next wall of whitewash coming at you. Now, I think this is a little bit like life sometimes. In life, there are those periods of our time where everything is going well, it's all calm, it's all rosy, it's wonderful. And then there are those times where it's not just wonderful and calm, but it's exhilarating. You find yourself at the right place at the right time and everything comes together and you're just on a high on life. But then there are those times where instead of that situation, life is on top of you. And everything falls apart, something crashes into you, and it just makes you wonder whether you're ever going to get back to the surface. And worst of all are those seasons in life where you get hit not just with one of those waves, but wave after wave after wave. And you just find yourself wondering, will I ever make it through all of this? Well, today we're going to be unpacking the life of a character from the Old Testament who had one of those experiences. And his name is Job. And so the story of Job is found in the book called Job in the Old Testament. And it's a really fascinating story, and it helps us as we try to wrestle with these questions of why do all these things happen in our life? Why is there pain in the world? Why is there suffering? And those types of things. So the story begins, and the Bible gives Job these really great description of him. And the Bible uses words like this. It says that Job is blameless, Job is upright, he feared God and he shunned evil. In an ancient world filled with strife and wickedness, Job was a bright light. And he was someone who lived to help the people around him. And as you actually read through the story, these little insights that give you a little idea of what this actually looked like in Job's life. He was someone who, when there was someone in need, he reached out to help them. He looked after people who were widows or orphans or strangers, whoever it was. He was their protector. He was someone that tried to bring them justice in their life. He was someone that made his community a better place. And not only was Job a person that wanted to help the people around him, but he actually had the means to do this as well. And the Bible says that Job was the greatest man among all the people of the East. And when it says great there, it's especially talking about his incredible wealth and the influence that he had. It says in the Bible that he had 500 oxen, 500 donkeys, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, and had this really massive family as well. So Job had this great life. He was really, everything was coming together for him. It was going really fantastically. The problem was, it was all about to change for Job. And little did Job know that behind the scenes, there was a conversation taking place in heaven that was going to have a really dramatic impact upon Job's life. And so let's read what that conversation was in heaven and see how it impacted Job. This is what it says. So in Job chapter 1, verse 6, it says, "One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, 'Where have you come from?' And Satan answered the Lord, 'From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it.' Then the Lord said to Satan, 'Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and who shuns evil.' 'Does Job fear God for nothing?' Satan replied. 'Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face.'" So here's this really mysterious, behind the scenes, unseen conversation taking place where Satan is up in this gathering of sorts in heaven, and he is accusing Job. And when God is saying, Job is this awesome guy, Satan's like, well, it's just because you bless him so much, God. In fact, even though he appears to be this really generous person, it's all just a show. If you took away those blessings, just wait. Job will turn his back on you, God. You just see. And so it goes on to say that the Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. And if there was ever an ominous verse in the Bible, it's this. Satan is going out to bring some sort of destruction upon Job. And so this is what happens. And so Job is just going about his life. It's regular, it's normal. When a man comes running up to him, and it's one of his servants, and he looks distressed on his face, and he's in a panic. Job, 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 Job. The Sabians, they came and attacked us, and they stole all of your oxen and all of your donkeys, and they killed all of the servants that were looking after them. Only I was able to escape and to bring you the news here. And Job hears this, and it's just like this wave of like disaster crashes into Job's life. But just as that person is finished talking, another person runs up. Job, 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 Job. You're not going to believe this. We're out with the sheep, and this lightning came down from the sky, and it started this fire, and it consumed, and it killed all of the sheep and all the people that were looking after them. Only I was able to escape to come to you right now. Wave number 2. And then a third person comes to Job. Job, 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 the Chaldeans attacked us, and they stole all the rest of your animals, and they killed all the servants as well. Wave number 3. And then the worst one of all, this man comes, and he just has this incredible distress in his face. Job, all of your family was in a house, and this storm came, and the house fell down, and your family is no more. In a moment like that, everything for Job goes from being wonderful to just being absolute disaster. What do we learn from this? Well, the first lesson that we're going to learn from this story is that there are things happening behind the scenes, unseen things that are impacting our lives today, and we don't even know that they're going on. And in this series that we're doing called The Unseen, we're going to try to unpack some of these things. We're not going to find all the things that are going behind the scenes, but the Bible does reveal to us some little insights about the story that's going on that is behind the scenes in spiritual realities and in the heavenly realities. And over the next 8 weeks, we're going to be unpacking some of these ideas to help us to make sense of this grandest story that we are a part of. So let's go back to Job. So Job has this horrible news to come to him. How would you respond if you got news like this? Well, this is what Job does. It says, at this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all this, the Bible says, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. So here's Job. He's absolutely shattered. He's in terrible grief for what's happened, and yet he takes it to God in worship, and he praises God in the midst of all of that. Now, Job was a pretty impressive person, isn't he? I don't know how someone could praise God in the midst of all of that, but that's the type of person that Job was. And I wish I could tell you that his story finished here, but it actually continues to get worse. On another day, here we go for a conversation in heaven, number 2. On another day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present himself before him. The Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, from roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He's blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil, and he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason. Skin for skin, Satan replied. A man will give all he has for his own life, but now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well then, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life. Here's ominous verse number 2. And so the next thing that Satan does to Job is he afflicts him with this terrible sickness, and sores, these painful sores break out in Job's body from his head to the bottom of his foot. And everything is uncomfortable for him, and he just finds himself in this just absolute terrible place. And the Bible says he's sitting in the ashes, he's got a piece of broken pottery, and he's scraping those sores, and he's unrecognizable from what he used to be. And his wife comes up to him and says, Job, are you still with God after all of this? Isn't it about time that you just gave up on this God thing? Give up already. And his wife says, just curse God and die. And this is what Job says in response. He replied, you're talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? And the Bible says, in all this, Job did not sin in what he said. And so again, we have this sort of impressive resilience that Job has in the face of suffering. But there's something else that stands out to me about this thing that Job says, and something that disturbs me from what Job says. And that is, he says, shall we not accept good from God and not trouble? Where does Job believe that his trouble has come from? From God. Now, as readers of the book of Job, we have all this wonderful behind-the-scenes information. We know about this conversation that had happened in heaven, and it's very clear that Satan is the one that causes the storm and the fire and the raids and the sickness. Satan is the one behind all of that, not God. But for Job, he doesn't know any of that. He doesn't have that privileged information that we have as readers. And as a result of this, he believes that God is the source of his trouble. And I want to suggest to you today that one of the biggest lies that Satan wants us to believe is that God is the cause of our trouble. Now, why would Satan want us to think that? Well, here's the thing. If God is the one who's bringing all these bad things into our life, then that's going to start changing the way that we view God. If we buy into Satan's lie that God is the one who has caused our trouble, then we're going to start viewing God as a bit of a monster. And in fact, that's exactly what happens in the story of Job. And after this, we find this, we have 35 chapters after this of Job and his three friends just like arguing and debating and trying to figure out, why is all of this happening? Why is all of this suffering happening? And throughout all of it, the one thing they never question is whether or not God is the one who actually brings this is bringing this into Job's life. And it causes them to get some really messed up pictures of God as you go through. And I want to share with you what this lie does to Job's picture of God. Let me share just a few little snippets of this 35 chapter long conversation. So Job says this: "If my misery could be weighed and my troubles be put on the scales, they would outweigh all the sands of the sea. For the Almighty has struck me down with his arrows. Their poison infects my spirit. God's terrors are lined up against me." How do you feel about that picture of God? Holding a bow with these poisonous arrows and just sending these disasters into your life. That's the picture that Job came to see about God. It gets worse. Job says in chapter 16, "God hates me and angrily tears me apart. He snaps his teeth at me and pierces me with his eyes. Again and again he smashes against me, charging at me like a warrior. Yet I have done no wrong," he says. What an awful picture of God. Hateful, angry, charging at Job time and time again. What about this one? In chapter 30, "With a strong hand, God grabs my shirt. He grips me by the collar of my coat. He has thrown me into the mud. I'm nothing more than dust and ashes. I cry out to you, O God, but you don't answer. I stand before you, but you don't even look. You have become cruel towards me." What an awful picture of God. And so what we see here is that Satan is doing all these horrible things, but then he's tricked Job into thinking that actually it was God doing him, so that Job ends up no longer trusting in God. And so the good news I want to share with you today is that God is not the cause of your trouble. That is, if you're going down that path, it's a lie from Satan. And you might think, I don't believe that. I've never heard that. At least in Christian circles, we don't think this. But sometimes in even our well-meaning one-liners that we give to people when they're going through difficult times, we kind of tell this lie as well. When we say things like this: "One day you'll look back on this and you'll thank God for it." What about this one? "All of this trouble, it's really just a blessing in disguise. God has a purpose in this, and you'll find this out soon enough." And yes, it's true that God has this incredible ability to take our pain and to bring good things out of it. But that's different to seeing God as actually the one who brings that pain into our lives in the first place. And so God is not the cause of your trouble. The second lie that Satan tells throughout the story of Job is this: that you are the cause of your trouble. And what's interesting is, now Job tries to maintain his innocence throughout the story, but his three friends are not convinced. And they try really hard to convince Job that if all of this is happening, there must have been something that you did that has caused God to do all of this. Because God's a just God. He wouldn't treat you in this way if you didn't deserve it. And let me share with you a couple examples from the friends. Eliphaz says this to Job: "You must have refused water for the thirsty and food for the hungry. You probably think the land belongs to the powerful and only the privileged have a right to it. You must have sent widows away empty-handed and crushed the hopes of orphans. That is why you're surrounded by traps and tremble from sudden fears. Job, you must have done something to bring this upon yourself." What about Bildad? What does he say? "Does God twist justice? Does the Almighty twist what is right? Your children must have sinned against him, so their punishment was well deserved." Does that bring comfort? If this terrible thing happened, they must have deserved it, Job. Change your ways, go back to God, and he'll sort this situation out. But as we're hearing this, as readers, we know about this conversation that happened in heaven. And what did God say about Job? It says, then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. He still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason. Now, it's true that the decisions we make sometimes can have bad consequences. But that was not the reason this was happening to Job. But Satan was trying to make him either think that God's a monster or that he himself must be a monster. Both of these have the whisper of Satan coming through. Now, there is one thing that might sort of stand out to you as you read through here, is that God seems to be taking responsibility for this. Have you noticed that? God says, you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason. Instead of saying, you did this, God here is taking responsibility. Well, how do we make sense of that? Well, is God responsible? Well, he didn't cause these things, but the one thing that God is responsible for is that God gave the freedom that allowed an environment where this terrible thing could take place. Now, why would God do that? Well, in the next couple of sermons that we're going to have on this Unseen series, we're going to be diving into some of these sorts of ideas about how, because God is a God of love, he's a God of freedom, and with that freedom comes risk. But I want to ask you the question, if God even just allowed these things to happen, does that make God a terrible person? I want to share with you a story. So remember how I said I used to always live by the beach? Well, a number of years ago when I was living at Kingscliff, and I was right across from the beach, I used to love going for early morning walks on the beach. And one morning, I got up and it was just a beautiful day, and the sun was out, and the weather was actually enjoyable, unlike Melbourne. And I was going for a walk along, and I saw this baby bird. And I'm the sort of person that when I see something in nature like that, I want to get as close to it as I can. And so I see up near the sand dunes this baby bird sitting there. And it wasn't just like a tiny little baby bird, it was a big baby bird. So it must have been like a bird of prey or something like this. And I slowly am like creeping up to this bird and trying to get close until I could get a good sight of it. And I'm just having this moment of enjoying nature and enjoying this beautiful, fragile little creature that God has created. Now, while I'm there with the bird, I look out in the corner of my eye and I see walking down the path to the beach this lady. And this lady has with her a very energetic dog. And she walks to the end of the path and she unclips the lead from that dog. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen dogs when they've been inside for a long time and they're finally let free. What do? They're full of energy and they're running around and running this way and running that way. And there's just this like hyperactivity that you see in their eyes. And this is what this dog looked like. So this dog is running around and just letting out all this energy. And I start thinking, wow, this dog is like getting pretty close to where this bird is. And I start like trying to stand in between these two creatures so that there's no line of sight. But something the dog did must have scared this bird, because the bird suddenly darted into the bushes. And the dog saw in the corner of its eye something moved, and it just runs, jumps up and just dives headfirst into these bushes and disappears. And I'm thinking, quick, let's get this dog out of there. And I run up there, and before I can get this dog comes out, and in the dog's mouth is this baby bird. And for the next couple of minutes, the owner of this dog and myself are desperately trying to catch this dog to get it to drop this bird. And I'd already had this sort of connection with this bird, and I was really distressed by this. But it wasn't just me, but the owner of the dog was even more distressed than I was. She was clearly someone who loved animals, and she had just tears pouring down her face, and she was saying, let it go, let it go, let it go, desperately trying to catch this animal that she had set free. And I remember when we eventually caught the dog, unfortunately the bird did not survive this encounter with this dog. But the woman just like looked at me and said, so sorry. And then she grabbed the dog, went back to her car, and didn't go for her walk on the beach. Now, in this story, was that woman responsible for that horrible thing that took place? What do you think? Yes or no? Did she do that horrible thing? But was she responsible for it? What was she responsible for? She was responsible for the freedom that she gave that dog. But here's the thing. Just because she gave the freedom to that dog doesn't mean that that terrible thing that happened was at all a reflection of her heart. In fact, it was completely the opposite. She was so heartbroken by this thing that had taken place. And so just because God allows evil in our world doesn't mean it's a reflection of his heart. In fact, when we go through difficult times, it actually breaks the heart of God. When we suffer, God suffers. When we feel pain, God feels pain. But not just for us, he carries the emotions of that for the whole world that's going through these things. He's not distant from us when we are suffering. In fact, when you look at Jesus on the cross, you see that he's actually with us in the suffering. He knows what it's like to experience these things far more than we could ever possibly realize. And just because God allows evil doesn't mean it's a reflection of his heart. I want to finish with one practical thing for us, and then we'll close. And here's something I want you to take away from the story of Job. When facing life's troubles, who is more important than why? Who is more important than why? Now, what do I mean by this? Remember how I said there's this 35-chapter-long conversation between Job and his friends? Well, as they go through there's a number of times where they sort of cry out to God, if only God was here with us, then we could ask him why all this is happening. And there's this longing for God to show up and finally tell them the real reason why all these terrible things are happening to Job. Well, at the end of the book of Job, God does show up. And it's dramatic. There's this incredible storm that comes along, and it's just wild and awesome. And God speaks to Job through the storm. And as reader, you expect that finally God's going to say, hey, Job, this is what happened. There was this conversation with Satan in heaven, and Satan was throwing around all these accusations, and I said, no, Job's not like that. And he said, yes, you are. And then I allowed this to come into your life and give this whole sort of complicated explanation about why this is happening. Well, the frustrating thing about the book of Job is that when God shows up, he doesn't say why this is happening, but he simply talks about who he is. Let me show you a few of these verses when God shows up. Again, this is 4 chapters, but I'm just going to show you a few highlights. It says, then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. He said, who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. And then God gives all these questions like this. This one. Then the Lord spoke to Job. Here we go. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? God asks. Tell me if you understand. Have you comprehended the vast expanses of the earth? Tell me if you know all of this. Who provides food for the raven when its young cry out to God? Do you give the horse its strength or clothe its neck with a flowing mane? Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom? Does the eagle soar at your command? And God just talks about all these different things that he knows because he's the creator God that Job couldn't possibly know because he's just a creation, not the creator. And so here's Job. He wanted to know why, but God simply reveals himself. Now, why does God do this? And I think one of the realities of the unseen is that we are never going to have a full picture of why. We're never going to know all the answers. I love this story because it gives us one little tiny insight into the why, and that is really helpful, that there's an enemy that's actually involved in behind the scenes as well. But it doesn't answer all the questions. And I think what God is doing is saying that because God created us, he knows so much more than us. Because he created us, he sees the end from the beginning. Because he created us, he sees the big picture. He sees all the unseens. And because of that, God simply invites us to see him as our creator and to trust in him. But one of the things that Job didn't have is something that we do have, and that is that for us today, we know God not just as the one who created us, but we also know God as the God who died for us. And what does that say about God? It says that God not only has all this power, has all this knowledge, but he also has all this love as well, that God is for us and not against us, that he would do anything to rescue us, and that he is working towards a plan to one day bring us to a place where all the pain and all the suffering is no longer a part of our experience. And so I think the book of Job really invites us to not just ask why, and it's okay at times to ask why. If there's anything we can learn from Job, it's that it's okay to be very real with God. But at the end of the day, the thing that's going to really help us as we navigate the struggles and the trials of life is not simply knowing why, but it's knowing who. To see who God is as the one who made us, which means he knows the full story. He has the big picture in his mind, but also as the God who died for us. And I think if we keep our eyes fixed upon these two things, it's going to make a tremendous difference in our lives.